Good morning, and I'd like to thank you all for being here today, and particularly to Leonie and Kate for conceiving 100 Hours and for making it a reality, which has been a thoroughly enjoyable experience. Our series of encounters with our objects, with each other, and with experts and discussants has been stimulating, intriguing, challenging, uncomfortable at times, sociable, eye-opening, and surprising. In common with my fellow researchers, it has afforded me the opportunity to reflect and consider my ways of seeing, looking, investigating, misunderstanding, and to think about what it means to know an object. I'll be sharing in the next 10 minutes some of what I know and much of what I don't about the Dodo bones in UCL. While there are myriad avenues to follow starting from the bones, today I will touch particularly upon themes of circuits and limits of knowledge, presence and absence, and familiarity and unfamiliarity. This latter dichotomy was inspired by Liz's talk in the excellent recent recorded session that she, Matt and Juliet presented at Crash recently. And it was precisely the blend of familiarity and unfamiliarity which drew me initially to select the Dodo bones. Basic knowledge and recognition of the image of the dodo can almost be taken for granted, and I personally have several touchstones. I work on the Indian Ocean and on islands. I grew up reading Lewis Carroll, and am a fan of the recent excellent animated film Pirates in an Adventure with Scientists, in which Polly the dodo, masquerading as a parrot, is hunted by a semi-villainous Charles Darwin. Yet, thinking about bones more specifically, and the 35 subfossilized specimens, was a great leap into the unknown, lacking, as I do, virtually any understanding of avian anatomy or experience of researching natural specimens. With my work on Zanzibar, however, I have paid particular attention to the way in which metropolitan ideas about the exotic rested on names, places, and things which were familiar and universally understood points of reference, yet depended on little actual personal knowledge of the thing itself, thing or place itself. Furthermore, the assemblage is, of course, man-made. The story of human intervention with these bones underlines the story of such collections, and of course dodo history more generally. My first encounter with the bones immediately highlighted my lack of knowledge. My attempts at recognition, throwing out words recalled from GCSE biology, of which only vertebra was uttered with any conviction, was soon put right by the very patient Mark Carnell, curator at the Grant Museum, who talked me through all the specimens, twice. Comparison here was crucial, and we examined the bones alongside a model skeleton of another, in this case flying bird, both to locate where the bones would be on the animal and the effect of flightlessness upon a skeleton. This is alongside actually Richard Owen's first original description of the dodo. The light weight and fragility of the bones was immediately striking, as were the surface, the different colours alluding to the various different find spots from which these bones were taken. They weren't of the same bird, these were gathered from different places. That they were subfossils also represents a process interrupted, the bones frozen in time. I confess I also found myself just a little starstruck by handling these objects. Knowing the privilege of actually touching the remnants of such an extinct thing was powerful, and I struggle somewhat to articulate the effect. This gut feeling of rarity and the iconic status of them was then somewhat dislodged when the bones gained a monetary value. An auction which happened to take place during the course of the project revealed that a leg bone had an estimated price of £7,000 to £10,000 and a pelvis 12,000 to 15,000. The need for comparison specimens and drawings also draws attention to the recurrent issue of absence when dealing with dodo bones. Only one example of dodo flesh still exists in Oxford's Natural History Museum. All other dodos brought alive to Europe in the 17th century decomposed. The majority of sets of bones are composite, like the UCL examples. In the absence of more than one known complete skeleton, which is in the museum in Mauritius, we may never know exactly what they look like. Ideas are constantly being revised. Richard Owen, the major 19th century scholar of natural history and the first to describe the dodo in 1866, based his first drawings, on the right, on the famous 17th century painting, which is he mapped it onto a squat image of a dodo. But 4 years later, he revised this, studying other birds which he realised were closely related, and reconstructing it as more standing up straighter. The thinner dodo is now the preferred model. It probably weighed around 10 kilograms. And the UCL bones were recently used in a research project to estimate this average dodo mass. With an interest in museum and collecting history, I naturally sought to discover the story behind the presence of these particular bones in the UCL collections. How did they come from a swamp in Mauritius into UCL? And on this point, I have struggled to know specifics. The records are minimal. Here is the reference to the acquisition of casts, which were later acquired via Oxford and the British Museum of Natural History. And then later, the bones are indicated here in the register. And this one's interesting because in pencil, you see the original name of the dodo, Didus ineptus, and then it's crossed out for its actual proper name, the now Raphus cuculatus, because it's part of the pigeon family. But again, that really alludes to the idea of language associated with dodos does absolutely perpetuate notions of clumsiness and ineptitude. The wider context of collection, however, does tell of the meaning of the dodo within academic circles and networks of the late 19th century and the relationship with those on the ground in Mauritius, marked here on the map. Following their extinction on the island in the late 1600s, by the 19th century many began to doubt this fabled bird's existence. The publication of Hugh Strickland's The Dodo and Its Kindred in 1848 instigated the race to find actual specimens. Owen, the preeminent zoologist of his day, had a particular interest in flightless birds and made it clear, via the Bishop of Mauritius, that he was keen to acquire bones. This message reached the schoolteacher George Clark on the island, who in 1865 succeeded, discovering a new mass of bones in the Mare aux Songes on the southeast of the island. His claim to be the first was later disputed. Nonetheless, he became the main collector and purveyor of bones to Britain. According to a visitor, his house was devoted to organising these specimens. In quotes, he placed each on the corresponding drawings of the dodo bones, a volume of which lay on his table. And we've talked about objects in domestic spaces and science overlapping and found this evidence of him actually arranging these objects around this house. And that probably was using Strickland's book. Richard Owen then wrote to Clark, making it clear that all consignments of specimens were to be sent via him. Clark, however, also later sent some through Edward Newton, who was a colonial officer in Mauritius, coincidentally, but whose brother was Alfred Newton, another very significant turn-of-the-century zoologist. Clark attempted to conceal the number of bones that he had discovered in order to maintain the high price on the market. And there were several auctions in London of such material, and it's likely that the UCL bones were acquired from this time from one of those auctions, although we've yet to find precisely which one. Marcus and none actually match up with the bones that we have. The coincidence of these spheres of interest in the late 19th century, colonial connections, academic competition, and the burgeoning iconic image of dodos together made these necessity for a natural history museum to obtain. I was further intrigued by the circuits of knowledge that surround the bones today. How do we use an array of bones that do not come from the same specimen? And as I mentioned in my abstract, they are made to speak to visitors in the museum today by other objects, by text and material that surrounds them. I doubt, perhaps like me, that many visitors are able to identify more than the vertebra when they look at the tray of bones, and yet they are the star objects to which others react. The quagga and the thylacine, both extinct much more recently in the late 19th and early 20th century, lack the status of the dodo. Thus, these bones provide the springboard for this narrative of conservation and ecological responsibility. The story here in UCL is quite different to, for example, Manchester, where the cast of the Oxford head, which you can see in the centre here, is surrounded by a flock of apparently flying cuddly dodos. In a teaching context in UCL, they support discussions of biodiversity, what actually occurred in the evolution of flightlessness via comparison with penguins, ostriches, and kiwi remains. As mystery objects, as I have discovered, they are a great teaching tool to learn anatomy, and this is one way in which they can be used. Finally, the great virtue of this project for me has been how people's objects and their reactions to them have helped me think from new perspectives about my own. There are countless examples of this which have informed my blog posts and my paper. But the final point I wish to make is about sound. Thinking about Kate's discussion of the whistle and its silence to human ears led me to wonder what noise a dodo would make. By coincidence, yesterday I posted on Twitter a picture of the British Museum De Morgan tile of a dodo in anticipation of today, which, thanks to Mark's circulation, spread rather widely. And you can see here the response that I got from the Museum of Natural History in Oxford, who adapted it, but finished off with "squawk, nice bird." Note too also the name of the Natural History Museum there's more than Dodo, so they feel that dominates what they are there to do. Did Dodo squawk? Well, once again, we're not sure. One source I found left it ambiguous in, quote, "The call of a dodo was probably very similar to that of a young goose, while other sources say they didn't make a sound at all." We probably shan't ever know. We don't have enough of the material left to find out. But the preservation of bones and the multiple ways they are continuing to represent and that continue to be represented, examined, probed and reproduced, as I did when I 3D printed a dodo in an experiment, and I have one here to show you, means that the legacy of their existence continues to echo and to create noise. Thank you.